Does any role in the fivefold ministry allow more than one wife? The short answer, no. In the New Testament, all leadership roles, whether apostle, prophet, evangelist, pastor, or teacher, are held to the same marital standard, husband of one wife. This phrase appears repeatedly in the qualifications for spiritual leadership. In 1 Timothy 3:2, overseers, bishops, and elders. An overseer must be the husband of one wife. 1 Timothy 3:12, deacons. Let deacons be the husband of one wife. In Titus 1:6, elders again. Appoint elders if anyone is above reproach, the husband of one wife. These passages don't carve out exceptions for any of the fivefold ministry mentioned in Ephesians 4:11, but describe functions, not separate moral standards. Now, many will ask why this standard applies to all five roles. Well, apostles appoint elders, prophets speak into the life of the congregation, evangelists plant and strengthen communities, and pastors and teachers shepherd and instruct the flock. Every one of these roles requires the same level of integrity, example, and moral credibility. The early congregations were monogamous. Even though polygyny existed in the ancient world, Yah's house consistently required monogamy for leadership. The one-wife phrase is about faithfulness. It means faithful to one woman, sexually and relationally disciplined, above reproach in family life. This is essential for anyone entrusted with spiritual authority. Well, what about Old Testament figures who had multiple wives? Yes, Abraham, Jacob, David, Solomon, and others practiced polygyny, but none of them were New Covenant leaders. See, the New Testament sets a higher standard for the household of faith. Polygyny is never commanded, only regulated in the Old Testament because of the hardened hearts of the people. Yehoshua himself came to reestablish the creation ideal. The two shall become one flesh. So in the fivefold ministry, who can have more than one wife? No one. Not apostles, not prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers. The New Testament is consistent and unified on this point. Jude 1:4. For certain individuals whose condemnation was written about long ago have secretly slipped in among you. They are unrighteous people who pervert the grace of Yah into a license for immorality and deny Yehoshua the Messiah. 2 Peter 1-3. They will secretly introduce destructive heresies, even denying the master who bought them, bringing swift destruction on themselves. Many will follow in their depravity, and because of them, the way of truth will be defamed. In their greed, these false teachers will exploit you with deceptive words. Now, Peter's warning in 2 exposes the pattern of teachers who use Old Testament polygyny to override the Messiah's own testimony, even though Yehoshua gives a fuller, corrective revelation of Yah's intent for marriage. Peter writes, there will be false teachers among you who will secretly introduce destructive heresies. 2 Peter 2:1. Peter is not describing teachers who openly deny the scriptures. He's describing teachers who use scriptures but twist it to smuggle in teachings that contradict Messiah. This is exactly the dynamic when someone uses Old Testament polygyny to override Messiah's own teaching on marriage. They are not rejecting the Bible if the error is unintentional. They are simply misapplying it. The pattern. Using earlier scripture to cancel later revelation. False teachers often appeal to, but Abraham did it. But David had multiple wives, plus the Torah allows it. And this is that very pattern Peter warns us about. They use something true, like polygyny existed, to justify something false, that Messiah affirms it. Now, while ignoring the fuller revelation Yah gives in Messiah, Peter calls this a secret introduction because it sounds biblical, but it undermines the very one Scripture points to. Messiah restores Yah's original design, and that trumps all prior examples. Yehoshua does not appeal to Abraham, David, or Solomon. He takes you back to Genesis 1 and 2. Before sin, before patriarchy, and before polygyny. He mentions in Matthew 19 and 8, from the beginning it was not so. Yehoshua restores the one man and one woman joined by Yahweh becoming one flesh. So when teachers use Old Testament polygyny to override red letter, they are placing the patriarchs above the Messiah, using former error to silence the perfect revelation. And this is exactly the kind of reversal Peter warns about. Why Peter's warning fits this issue perfectly. Peter says false teachers will arise among the people, meaning they come from inside the community, not outside. Secretly introduced, meaning they use subtle arguments, not blatant rebellion. Destructive heresies, meaning the teachings that damage the community and distort Yah's character. Using polygyny to override Yehoshua fits all three. It comes from within the household of faith, it uses scripture subtly and selectively, and it destroys marriage's dignity in the witness of Messiah. Now the core issue, whose testimony has final authority? Using Old Testament polygyny to override Yehoshua's teaching is precisely the kind of subtle scripture-twisting error that Peter warns about, because it replaces Messiah's revelation with human error and smuggles in a destructive teaching under the guise of biblical legitimacy. They are, whether they realize it or not, doing what Peter warned about, dethroning the Messiah and introducing a teaching he explicitly corrected. False teaching is not always wild, obvious rebellion. Sometimes it is simply refusing to let Yehoshua be the final word. Our movement stands with the Messiah's testimony, not the loopholes of men who creep in unnoticed and twist the grace into license. Because Messiah, the one who breathed creation into being, the one who restored the garden's first design, he is the final word in his house. No culture, no systems that center men, no traditions that chain us, and no errors of the forefathers trump the glad tidings. In Matthew 19, 9 through 12, he says, "Whoever puts away his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery." This describes a three-step process that was common in his day. A man dismisses his wife. He sends her away from the home. This is not a legal divorce. It is abandonment. He withholds the legal certificate. Torah requires a written certificate, Deuteronomy 24 and 1, and men were avoiding this to keep control over the women. Without the certificate, she is still legally bound to him. Or he marries another woman. This creates a situation where he has one wife still legally bound, another wife taken on top of her, and this is functional polygyny, and the Messiah calls it adultery. This process makes polygyny impossible. Yehoshua's ruling is simple. If a man adds another wife while the first covenant is still standing, he is committing adultery, not practicing biblical polygyny. What Yah has joined together, let no man separate. Polygyny requires a man to separate the unity of the first marriage to add another. Adding another wife, according to Yehoshua, is adultery and a legal direct judgment. A teacher who promotes polygyny must explain why Messiah calls the process sin instead of permissible. The only legitimate cause he gives for dissolving a marriage is sexual immorality, porneia, and only then may a man legally divorce and then marry another. The disciples responded with shock. They say, if this is the situation, it is better not to marry. Messiah eliminated all loopholes, cultural practices, and restored marriage back to its origin. They understood exactly what he meant. Messiah goes on to explain that not everyone can accept this. And although it is not about polygyny, it is about the seriousness of covenant marriage. And if you cannot honor the covenant the way Yah designed it, it is better not to enter into it. Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? Certainly not. For no one can lay a foundation other than the one already laid, which is Messiah.